Welcome to the WTR Healthcare Happenings podcast. I'm your host, Tim Gerdeman, Vice Chair and Co-Founder and Chief Marketing Officer of Water Tower Research. In today's podcast episode, I'm being joined by Anthony Tennyson, CEO of Solvonis Therapeutics. Also joining us is my Water Tower Equity Research colleague, Robert Sassoon. Solvonis Therapeutics is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company dedicated to developing novel medicines for high-burden central nervous system or CNS disorders, primarily focusing on addiction and mental health conditions with significant unmet needs. Solvonis is a UK domiciled company listed on the London Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol SVNS. Anthony and Robert, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Tim. Good to speak to you and good to speak to Robert.
Great to speak to you as well, Anthony. Really interested to find out more about your company.
So Anthony, before I hand it over to Robert to ask a few questions, let me start by asking you to give our listeners a 30,000-foot overview of the company and how it came into being, as well as providing just a brief overview of your professional background, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so, Tim. So what we're building in Solvonis is we're building what we hope to be a leading CNS company focused on developing novel small molecules and repurposing already approved small molecule medicines, specifically targeting high burden CNS disorders. Currently, our focus and our core competency is in addiction and psychiatry, specifically in alcohol use disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. But we are working to deepen our expertise and our scope and our pipeline within addiction and also psychiatry, and looking to stretch and flex out in due course into neurology. What really sets us apart is our exceptionally efficient use of capital to progress R&D assets and R&D programs to the appropriate inflection point. For example, we in-licensed a phase 2 program for alcohol use disorder. Didn't cost us anything. We're now in phase 3 for that program. With that program for an N equals 280 person trial, potentially definitive, total price for that trial is 2.25 million sterling or 3 US, and costs to us are capped at $1 million US or 800K UK. That's unheard of in the biopharma industry, particularly then in light of the really, really strong results at that phase 2. People were sober 2% of the time before being randomized and detoxed. And those that went through the active arm of the trial achieved 86% sobriety in the 6 months post-treatment. So we're really excited, Tim, about what we're building. Deep focus, addiction, psychiatry, exceptional efficient use of capital. And the last thing that I want your audience to know about, and that really sets us apart, is our team. Our science is led by Professor David Nutt, the world authority in the development of small molecule therapeutics for the treatment of addiction and psychiatry. Our chairman, he's an American, your audience might know him, a guy called Dennis Purcell. He ran the healthcare franchise for Hambrecht and Quist before it was bought by JP. He, in fact, set up H&Q Week, which became JP Week. And then he has his own VC shop in New York called Aisling Capital, or as an Irish guy, it's actually Ashling Capital. And so then me, the last part of the team, I'm not a scientist. I'm a business guy. I'm a degree and a master's in technology, so I'm a technologist by training. I wanted to know how money worked coming out of uni, so I got a job at Merrill Lynch on the capital market side, worked with them for a couple of years, then worked with Bank of Ireland, the largest bank in Ireland, on the capital market side for a couple of years. Left banking when the proverbial hit the fan, 07 to 09, went to work into professional services, worked for Aon, world's largest insurance and reinsurance brokerage, did an MBA, ended up in the fast track. But something that really hit me when I was working in the financial district in Dublin, which is cheek by jowl with the North Inner City, which is the most underprivileged part of my country, is the damage at large that has been wrought to those parts of society by alcohol, heroin, and gambling, and the complete lack of innovation and effectiveness by the pharma industry and effectiveness of the overall healthcare industry in treating those chronic diseases. And so that motivated me to do something better, different, more interesting. So I co-founded a company called Awaken Life Sciences in Canada to take advantage of the change in regulators' attitudes, investors' attitudes towards psychedelics. We founded that company. We built a really good company. We brought it public on the CBO Neo. Things were going well until the biotech winter caught us as it caught everyone else. That company ended up on the CSE. And then I came across into a vehicle in London called Graph Polymer in May of last year. And since then, worked damn hard to refocus, repurpose, restructure, and rebrand that company into Solvonis Therapeutics. And we completed the acquisition of Awaken in May of this year. We've raised about 4.5 sterling since May of this year, which is about 8 US, which in the London markets is quite an achievement, particularly in the current environment. And as I said, we're building Solvonis now from an emerging company into what we hope will be an established leading European CNS focused biotech with plans ultimately, or aspirations, should I say, to ultimately come across to your side of the water and to list on New York.
That's a great background. Thank you so much for sharing it. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, as a calloused Wall Streeter, that was a genuinely touching story. That's really cool. So with that, I'll turn it over to Robert Sassoon.
Yeah, thanks for that. That was a great introduction. And I always, when I was in Dublin, I thought the Liffey was, it was a sort of a current of beer rather than water. But anyway, for those of our podcast listeners not so familiar with Solvonis, can you give us an overview of the development pipeline you're running and highlight the progress of the company's lead programs?
Yeah, happy to do so. So like I said in the introduction, we've got a core we're focused on high burden CNS disorders. We have a dual R&D strategy, which is focused on drug discovery, but also on repurposing. So the repurposing assets are obviously the most progressed, and they're in the clinic. Our lead program, we're repurposing racemic ketamine in combination with copywritten cognitive behavioral therapy for the treatment of severe alcohol use disorder. So severe alcohol use disorder affects about 1/3 of the people who suffer with alcohol use disorder. That program is called SVN-001. It's targeting severe alcohol use disorder for the UK and EU market. There's about 15 million people across the UK and the EU4 who suffer with severe alcohol use disorder. So this is a chronic disease with a poor current standard of care. As we mentioned, we've in-licensed a phase 2 program. Results were groundbreaking. People were sober 2% of the time. Robert, that's 7 days a year, right? So if you think about the total cost of treatment, and in the UK and EU, we measure drug effectiveness by QALYs, so quality of additional life years. So if you think about the positive impact that you can have on people, bringing them from being sober 2% of the time to being sober 86% of the time, we think we're on the cusp of really changing how alcohol use disorder can be treated over this side of the water. We're in phase 3. Recruitment started last year. It's an N equals 280 person, 2-armed active placebo-controlled trial. Recruitment is forecast to complete late next year. Data analysis 27. Marketing authorization application 28, and ideally being in market in the UK with our own brand of ketamine for the treatment of severe alcohol use disorder through the course of late 28, early 29, targeting a mixed full application. You don't have that in the US, but that provides 8 to 10 years regulatory data protection on your phase 2 and our phase 2 and phase 3 data. We need something with a deeper IP moat for the US market, which is much larger and much more valuable, but that mixed full application route doesn't exist in the US. So we're repurposing J&J's Spravato from a nasal spray into an oral thin film for sublingual and buccal delivery. We've in-licensed a completed phase 1 program from a German CDMO. They've filed formulation patents. We've completed a type of phase 2A program, which has enabled us to file method of use patents. We had a meeting with the agency in December of last year. They agree we can 505(b)(2) into Spravato once we establish the bridge. And very importantly, they agreed that no further human data is required before proceeding into phase 2B if the bridge is successfully established. So for us, what that means is we don't have any preclinical costs, we don't have any phase 1 costs, we don't have 2A costs, and we hopefully will be going into phase 2B next year, subject to establishing the bridge. And what people should understand, and what they probably do, is Spravato is a blockbuster drug. It's on label for, I think, treatment-resistant depression with suicidal ideation. Affects about 2 million people in the US. There's 15 million people in the US suffering with moderate to severe alcohol use disorder. There's 15,000 clinics in the US treating alcohol use disorder. So we don't need to make the market. And so if you like the sales curve for Spravato, you might like what we're doing with alcohol use disorder. And we've got a preclinical discovery engine that's modulating SERT.net receptors as releasers or as reuptake inhibitors. And that's enabling us to do some interesting, exciting stuff in PTSD, but also exploring going deeper into addiction, deeper into psychiatry, and in due course, expanding into neurology. So that's us.
That sounds amazing. So, but given that you're still a small company within an advanced clinical development, what is your commercialization strategy?
I need to be cognizant of our size when I answer this question. Our market cap is 25 million sterling. So that's in and around 35 US plus or minus. So we are undervalued, in my opinion. And because we're undervalued, our balance sheet is of a certain size. So our business model is to build, progress, and out-license. And in fact, we are in discussions for our lead program at the present time. But our commercialization strategy is to progress research to the appropriate inflection point and to seek to out-license to larger players. And that's really our magic sauce, and what sets us apart is our ability to progress research with a real laser focus on being capital efficient to the appropriate inflection point, and then hopefully successfully out-license.
Right, but you mentioned the two programs. You got two AUD programs going, SVN-001, which is your lead program. That's focused on UK and Europe. And you got SVN-002, which is going to be focused on the US. So what's the thinking behind splitting the two programs regionally?
But it's about IP. So for the 001 program in the UK and the EU, we can do something, apply for a mixed full application, which is a marketing authorization or regulatory approval that relies on your own data, but also on data from the research, and not relying on any third-party data. And if you do that, you can secure 8 to 10 years regulatory data protection on your own data. So that means we'll have our own data, our own phase 2 and our own phase 3 data, which will put us about 10 years ahead of anyone else from a research perspective, but also provides us with 8 to 10 years regulatory data protection, which we believe will enable us or a potential future partner establish a decent franchise for the treatment of severe alcohol use disorder in the UK and in due course in the EU. That protection isn't available in the US, and hence we're seeking going down we are pursuing a 505(b)(2) pathway with our SVN-002 program, which will provide us with up to 5.5 years regulatory data protection if our patents are recognized in the Orange Book, which we think will be exciting and interesting for us, but potentially for a commercial partner. And bearing in mind that that's the same level of IP and regulatory data protection that Spravato had for J&J, because S-ketamine was already on label or available in the US.
Right. Okay, so let's, before we delve into Solvonis' therapeutic model, it'd be interesting to talk about your main therapeutic focus, which is alcohol use disorder. So according to statistics I read from the US government, the prevalence of AUD amongst American adults is pretty high, at around 27 million or 10% of the adult population. Yet it seems that only 2 to 3% of those adults actually receive some form of pharmacological treatment. So I think I don't know whether you can verify whether that's true in Europe, whether the same story. But anyway, these figures seem incredibly low. So can you explain why you think that is?
They are low because the current standard of care is inadequate for this chronic and debilitating disease. The numbers that you quoted are pretty much right. NIHR states that there's 29 million Americans suffering with alcohol use disorder. Of those, 2/3 suffer with moderate to severe alcohol use disorder, which is the classification or the subcategory that we're targeting with 002. And the numbers and the prevalence rate is about the same in the UK and the EU4. So this is a chronic disease. It destroys families, it destroys communities, and it unfortunately often ends up in results in death. And so what we're doing is we're seeking to provide hope for those individuals, families, and communities who are being so poorly served by the pharmaceutical industry to date. And the reason why so few people seek treatment is, as I said, treatments don't work. 75% of people will relapse within 12 months of treatment. And many of those people go back to drinking more than they did before they relapsed. So there's a significant unmet medical need for this indication.
Right. So you mentioned Spravato. It's a blockbuster drug. It's I think it's annualized sales are approaching $2 billion now for that drug. It's really sort of taken off in the last 2 to 3 years because I think the infrastructure is really being put together, particularly in the States. But because ketamine has already been previously FDA approved as an anesthetic, um, and then subsequently for TRD, treatment-resistant depression, off-label ketamine use is possible. So we've seen by all accounts, there's been a significant growth in off-label ketamine use for various mental health and addiction issues. So how does that factor into the commercialization strategy that you're planning?
So, off-label use is a thing. I can't deny that, but you will never. We believe that a drug like ketamine or esketamine will never achieve the critical mass that J&J have been successful in achieving with Spravato without reimbursement. And I can say that with a certain level because I used to be the CEO of Awaken Life Sciences, and in Awaken Life Sciences, we had a small healthcare operation. Now, this is coming from the UK and from the EU, but we set up 4 ketamine clinics, 2 in the UK, 2 in Norway, where we delivered consultant-led ketamine-assisted therapy for a range of indications, so for anxiety, depression, PTSD, eating disorders, and addiction. And we struggled to make those businesses work, even though the results were strong. The reason was that people do not have a very strong propensity to pay for mental health and addiction services out of their own pocket. Certainly in the UK and the EU, that propensity to pay out of pocket does not exist. And I think for at-scale adoption, you really do need reimbursement, both from the public payers and the private payers over here, and Medicare, Medicaid, and private payers in the US. And certainly, for the people who really do suffer with alcohol use disorder, some of those individuals, their lives can be quite chaotic, and they may not have, many of them will not have the means to pay for esketamine assisted therapy off-label. I think that it is a challenge, it is a thing, but for mass adoption, mass commercialization, like we see with J&J and Spravato for treatment-resistant depression, it's on label within the established healthcare industry with full insurance reimbursement, but also very importantly, product liability cover as well. All of that in place to enable you to scale and get to the kind of numbers that we think are achievable for an esketamine-based treatment for alcohol use disorder. And again, when we look at the size of the market, it's an order of magnitude different than the size of the market, the addressable market for treatment-resistant depression. There's 15 million people in the US with moderate to severe alcohol use disorder, single millions with treatment-resistant depression. There's 15,000 clinics registered with SAMHSA for the treatment of alcohol use disorder. About 8,000 of those deliver drug and therapy in one shape or another. So the distribution platform, the go-to-market route is more established, certainly for this treatment modality for alcohol use disorder, we believe, than it was for treatment-resistant depression when J&J started out with Spravato.
Okay, got it. So now will you highlight the upcoming milestone targets for SVN-001 and 002 that we should be looking out for?
Yeah, happy to do so. So we're in phase 3 for SVN-001, which is targeting severe alcohol use disorder for the UK and potentially also the EU markets. We're in phase 3. Recruitment is underway. So there's 2 tracks available for us. One is we bring it forward ourselves, or we out-license it. Should we out-license it, the key milestone in the near term would be a successful out-licensing for the UK and potentially EU markets with bullet, milestone, and future royalty payments. Should we bring it forward ourselves, the milestones will be completing enrollment through the course of late 26, data readout 27, marketing authorization application 27, 28, and subject to all things going according to plan, market launch 28, 29. For 002, it will be successfully establishing the bridge, which we're working with WuXi on doing right now. Once the bridge, should the bridge is successfully be established, it will be submitting a CTA to the FDA to include a clinical trial application for a phase 2B trial. And we'd hope to have the bridge established through the course of Q1, Q2 next year, or H1 next year, and then to have the CTA or the IND submitted in H2, and ideally have a phase 2B started at some stage next year in the US for moderate to severe alcohol use disorder.
You're going to be very busy, it seems.
Hopefully so.
Yeah. Okay, finally from me, can you speak about Solvonis's financial wherewithal? What is the company's current cash runway and financial strategy needed to advance the respective AUD programs through their next major milestones to commercialization?
Yeah, we're really pleased with how things are progressing. We've successfully accessed the markets in London a number of times since May of this year. So we've raised 4.25 million sterling since the end of May 2025, which is positive for us. We have runway through to 2027, which will enable us to achieve some of those key milestones I mentioned for both 001, 002, but also our preclinical programs for PTSD, and also what we're exploring, going deeper into addiction, deeper into psychiatry, and potentially expanding into neurology. Our ticker is liquid, which enables us, we believe, will enable us, I should say, we believe, to continue to access the markets in London at the appropriate times. So all in all, our plan is to continue to execute across our 3 core pillars, and to access the markets as and when we may need them, but we don't need to do that for the foreseeable future. As I said, we've got runway through to 2027.
Well, thank you for all that information and for keeping us abreast of the fascinating developments at Solvonis, which is really working towards more effective solutions for what is widely recognized as a major societal problem. Back to you, Tim.
Thanks, Anthony and Robert, for joining me today. And I will say, Anthony, at kind of a very personal level, I'm a very private person, but I actually have lost a family member and many, many friends to alcoholism. So I appreciate what a serious topic this is globally, and I wish you the best on success.
Tim, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. And Robert, sorry to hear that happened to you. There's also reasons why I'm involved in doing this as well.
Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, as well as visiting www.watertowerresearch.com to stay up to speed on the company's small cap written research reports, podcasts, fireside chats, industry-specific symposiums, and conference schedules. We will see you next time for another edition of the WTR Healthcare Happenings podcast. Finally, a special thanks to the producer and editor of the podcast, Krista Fitzpatrick.